All right, well, John now has the keys again on this podcast, recording it to his device, not to mine. So we apologize to our listeners for any sort of technical difficulties. It's not John's fault. This is not what he does daily, and Zoom is being a little testy with us, but we gotta get going. We got things to do, and we got some exciting stuff to share. So. Tune in on this
Let me just
episode.
start over.
No, we are not starting over. Well, there's the cold open right there. Anyways, welcome to the NerdBrand Podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Jason. That's Mitch, and that's John. And we don't have a guest because we're going to talk about ourselves today. It's not a narcissistic thing. It's just one of those slow weeks, and we're kind of glad that it's Friday. I hope you are too. So lots of stuff has been going on in the world of branding today. Some of the things we got that we're going to talk about really quickly, run through some bullet points. And John, do you have those in front of you?
I do.
All righty, cool. Well, let's start with the first one. We'll phrase it as a question, and then we'll kind of answer through it. But mostly the topic is today, why a branding agency, or alternative title is, what is NerdBrand?
I don't know.
I've had that question asked to me like 6 or 7 times. So I'm like, all right, let's break it down. But first, I think we'll focus on like your first bullet point.
You're the host.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you wrote it.
Is that how this works?
So
That's how
we're
this
the
works.
guest, right?
You wrote it. You wrote them. I didn't write them. You were like, hey, let's talk about this.
It was just a mild suggestion to the host. The first one is branding agencies function best on long-term partnerships. They're hopefully not typically in it for the quick buck. The rationale there, I think, is for me is coming across a lot of people who have been burned by agencies, who have been burned by freelancers and people who are just in it to make a quick buck, or maybe exaggerate their capabilities a little bit to make that sell. I think a good branding agency is in it for the long haul. They kind of have to be in the sense of, you can't turn branding on and off. It's always on, whether you're paying attention or not. The customers are paying attention, so you can't just kind of stop and go. I think you likened it to, it's a river. It needs a constant flow, and if not, then I don't know what happens to a river that doesn't flow anymore. It's not a river, but
it dries up.
It pulls up at the end, and it stagnates, and a bunch of mosquitoes get in, and everybody's got malaria. That's what happens.
That's a good analogy.
Well, I mean, the whole idea is that there's priorities, but there's a progression to how these things work. There's logical first steps, and then there are logical next steps. Mm-hmm. So instead of looking at, I have to fill this slot for this task to be done, it's not task oriented, it's process oriented, because each element in solid branding and solid marketing feeds the next step of the process. If you just have people addressing those elements in the process independently without any thought to the workflow and to the logical direction of the process, you're going to create a lot of smoke but no fire. You're not going to accomplish anything other than just keeping people busy and working their butts off for no good reason.
Yeah. It's very hard for us to do anything at that point, because for us in the company, for those listening, John is our director of accounts and he's our chief marketing officer. His primary duty is to go in tactically as a marketer and figure things out. But you know what? I'm explaining things about John, and John's here. I'll just let John talk.
Nope. Go on with your train of thought. I don't know. I have no idea where you were heading.
Well, no, it's like, so a lot of people want to start with marketing because that's the buzzword. A lot of people start with a website because they think that's the immediate need, because visually they look at it, they don't like what they have, or they don't have one. But the immediate need is actually what's going to go on those items. What's the copy that's going to go on the ad? What kind of imagery are you going to put on the website? Copy being words. goes on the website. But the copy, it's not just copy alone. It has a message, it has a voice, it has a tone. And I've used the analogy before that if you are Winnie the Pooh, do not write copy, create ads, do videos with scripts that make you sound like Tigger. And for God's sakes, please don't become Eeyore. So there's a specific tone to your copy. So you can have various tones. We can be playful and we can be very formal, but I don't think Nerd Brand is a type of, we don't do a lot of inside nerd jokes, even though nerd's in our name. You know, if I say Han shot first, a large population's like, what's a Han? So, you know, we don't really do a lot of that. Even though we do know that and we do have debates about that internally, but, you know, like I said, nerd's not a gimmick. Nerd is like an actual thing. Mitch gave me a Batman signal yesterday, so there's your random fact if you're listening right now. But that's kind of the way that we are, but we don't communicate in that way. So we have a specific tone. We have the voice is always the same because it's us, but we are trying. You want to be careful of those things. Now, from a tactical marketing perspective, like when it gets to John and gets to anybody that does marketing, you know, that sets the boundaries, it sets expectations of what's okay and what's not okay. Because you know, what if you're selling something serious and you kind of leave a pun in there? Has anybody ever noticed how that travels across Twitter and what happens in the news media when they get a hold of it? Like, it doesn't go well, you know, if it doesn't fit you. And that's my train of thought on that, is the tactical side of that is developing the strategy out or executing.
Well, it runs straight into the next one, which is marketing without branding is probably going to fall flat. You know, you have the analogy of marketing is asking for the date, branding gets you the yes. For me, it's, you know, we explain it all the time. It's, you can have tactics, you can be buried in tactics, you can be on every social channel pushing out stuff. If it's not done in the context of a higher strategy toward a vision, toward an end goal, toward a unified customer experience, it's not going to be as effective as you need it to be. I mean, I think we beat that horse to death on the podcast and in every prospect meeting and everything. So,
yeah, I mean, you know, it's like because right now a lot of as being blunt, not really attacking anybody or anything like that, but I know that it's confusing. When you hear marketing, what does that mean? When you hear branding, what does that mean? Sometimes people pitch it together. They're not together. Actually, they're completely different. We would actually we're happy to work with a marketing. We love working with a marketing director or somebody that's in communications or just in that channel. Like, we're not there to take your job. We're there to help enhance what you're doing.
I've been trying to think of because we talk about strategy and tactics, and you know, we use the term brand strategy all the time, and it's kind of like, what is that? It's a very kind of ambiguous, vague term that everybody throws around, frankly. So I've been trying to like tie it down into something real world that I think a lot of people are probably familiar with. Maybe they haven't thought about it super in depth, but and it's, you know, that's a company we talk about all the time. It's Apple, but kind of their think different philosophy, that campaign as a whole. I mean, when that occurred, Apple knew that like their competitors could deliver high quality products. Even more threatening, like their competitors frequently released products that were better than Apple's, just from a technical features and benefits perspective. They still do. I think we've talked about that plenty, where on a very technical level, a lot of what Apple puts out and pitches as, you know, revolutionary or the best has been being, you know, Samsung's been doing it for a few years or something, you know. So it was kind of like, how could Apple sway customers knowing that their competitors could actually probably at the time produce better products? And it kind of goes into Apple's ideal customer. They knew that they were like creators, innovators, early adopters. They wanted to be different, right? So that's kind of where that think different mentality, you know, that was a strategic positioning. You know, it wasn't just words that they came up with. It went all the way to the core of product development. Apple products look different. They work differently. They feel different. It's a, you know, like end-to-end closed system versus what their competitors were doing, which was mostly open source. So it's just when you think of strategy, it's not just like, I want this customer. It's more broad than that. It's more holistic. It's going to go all the way down to your customer service, your product development, your ads, obviously, and the messaging and the tone that you take and things like that. So to me, that's a good example of a real world, strategy that came to life and that people can really kind of tangibly see out there.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up like early adopters and people like that. Like, there's a wave, and I can't remember what it's called, but at the very bottom of that is your early adopters. You get like in the next phase up, these are the people that saw the early adopters adopt it, and they're like, I'll give it a try.
It's like early
And
majority
then,
or something like that. Something
yeah.
like
And then the next part of the wave, like at the peak of the wave, because it's like a hill up and down, right?
that.
At that peak, that's the sweet spot. Those are the people that are absolutely convinced because the early adopters and those other people bought it. Now, at the bottom of the wave on the other side, those are the people still buying rotary phones. So obviously, those are not the people you want. So your strategy has to align with where on that scale are you trying to hit? Because if you're going to talk to early adopters, whew, man, that's a hard sell. You got to be very philosophical. You got to hit them in the heart. You got to hit them in the mind. Like, they got to feel like, I'm going to be a part of something major. But the other people at the top, they're like, my dollar, it's $1. You can't just ask for it. So, what's the proof that this is actually going to help me and fulfill a need? Mm-hmm. So there's a difference.
Jonathan hit on something important here, and it ties back to user experience, but not in the conventional sense of user experience. It's user experience in that from the way that a person interacts with your product on a personal level, just them and the product, and translating that experience through every step of the brand journey, if you will. People have the same Apple is religious about people having that same experience when they go into the Apple store or when they go to their website or they encounter a piece of literature within the product itself, product packaging itself, and the product packaging itself.
Yeah, that's a total experience.
Exactly.
Unboxing videos, Google it.
Exactly. Yeah, user experience is might be considered a fairly recent term that's being thrown around, but it has to do with more than just that experience with the product itself. It's their experience with your brand as a whole, and it goes back to what Jonathan was saying about being holistic and you're philosophically about it.
But when talking about strategy, part of the point that I was transitioning from with John, like what you were saying, Jonathan, like they did a whole Think campaign, like they did a whole Think Different, was actually a very aggressive print campaign. Mm-hmm. And they were hitting those early adopters. Because they knew that there was something there, and they had to do something I feel like to target that, because they knew they weren't going to. No one starts at the top of that peak. Like if you start at the top of that peak, you're like a unicorn, But I think they knew that those in the middle, to get to that, they had to like hit the early adopters. And if you look at Apple now, like you said, Mitch, it's like a religion almost, they know everything they interact with, every single piece of material they interact with, including the purchasing of the product. Like Apple has evolved to that top of the peak now. That's where they're at. And it's hard to stay there, though. That's the other thing.
That's the challenge they're having now, which is that they've got these people who adopted the brand, adopted the products, but they don't want to keep doing that. So now you have these people, we're among them, who have iPhone 6s, iPhone 8s. They don't necessarily want, there is that segment of the market that's still going to stand in line. But Apple's challenge now is, how do we get the people that we convinced in the past to be on our team? How do we get them to keep being on our team and keep upgrading?
Yeah, because those people like us, they're kind of at the bottom. I'm never going to buy a rotary phone, but I'm kind of on the downside of the other side of that peak, where I'm like, this thing works. I don't have problems with it. I like it. I'm comfortable. Apple's got to figure out how to inspire me to go back to the other side and not be an early adopter, and maybe not be in that sweet spot at the peak, but be in that one place in between the two that is going to go out and get the latest iPhone. Mm-hmm. That's the challenge. So that requires a strategy.
Right. And that strategy you have to be able to pivot a little bit in your strategy too, because nobody saw COVID coming. Okay. Mm-hmm. A lot of people were stuck at home. They couldn't go to the office. Some people didn't have a paycheck for extended periods of time. So, you have to, when those kind of things come up, you have to be able to pivot your message in a way that's still true to your brand, but takes into account, okay, given current conditions, people aren't going to be able to as comfortably make that expense for that next new iPhone or that next iPad or the next MacBook Pro because of these extenuating circumstances. That's when you really have to make sure that you can adjust in such a way that you keep those people on board so that when things do ramp back up, they're coming back in, but still maintain your brand message. It's a daily minute to minute effort that you never step away from and come back to. You're always piloting that wheel. You're always piloting that wheel.
There's different audiences too within that now because Apple's so big. Like not every brand's going to start out and be this way, but the goal is one day you get there. Like the new MacBook Pros are beautiful. It's great. Oh, we got these extra colors. But my age group is like, yeah, but I'm fine with what I got, right? I'm fine with the old gray. I don't need color on that, So that the age demographics become different and do affect that scale. Younger audiences will typically become those early adopters. So innovating visuals it will create that. It has to be in that strategy. What the visuals are, whether that's an ad, where if that's the product, where if it's the website, whatever it is visually you engage with. As we want to thank previous podcast guest we had, Jason Bernard, saying people see before they read. That happens. People see before they read anything. So they're very good at capturing your attention on the next shiny object. And then once you're in the door there, like you said, Mitch, they interact with these things and they're like, well, yeah, the blue one's nice, but it does this in the hard drive and it has this storage. And I like to edit photos. So, it's regardless of the color, I really need to go this way and pick this product they offer because that's going to do photo editing really well. That's kind of an example.
Yeah, I think it goes back to kind of the first point and the overall why have a branding agency on retainer or very close to you routinely. I mean, even if a pandemic doesn't strike, you're still going to have to pivot pretty routinely. Maybe not quite as extremely as we had in the past year, but trying to bring in an agency or bring in outside people who are going to have to. There's a learning curve in your business, so if they're going to have to learn for 3 months or 6 months, then make the pivot, you might be too late. So it's kind of like having a branding agency right there alongside you. They're learning your business. There's kind of economies of scale in terms of education that you can take advantage of when you need to pivot. And then, like you said, Jason, visual. A lot of it's messaging plus visual. So there's a lot of creative needs that have to be knocked out quickly to get whatever the pivot message is out there. And again, if you're trying to scramble and bring in a random freelancer or bring in an agency, you may not have the funding to do it by that point or whatever. If it's, like a competitive pivot that needs to be done because somebody released a product or did something exceptional that's kind of just slamming your business to the ground.
What's the next one, John?
The next one is you can't DIY your brand to the top. That goes in probably more applicable to startups, to small businesses that really can't afford to internalize a lot of marketing leadership or personnel. But it also applies to big brands that, I've seen a few job descriptions recently that are trying to DIY themselves to continue to be successful. They're already very national retail chains, but you got to have professionals at the table. It's not something that one person can be great at graphic design and strategy and social media and this and that. You got to have specialists who can really pour their time, bring their passions to the table and bring their expertise to the table. I think we see a lot of people, and unfortunately it's budget related usually, or just operations internally are not quite as organized as is needed to be able to afford to bring in that outside professional help. But it's mandatory. Not one person, no business owner, not even a marketing director can do everything that's needed to really push a brand forward.
Well, the other thing about DIY is even with larger corporations who bring in and build large internal advertising agencies. I mean, I've always felt, and I think it's valid, the benefit of having an outside branding agency alongside you is they're not internal. They see you from the outside. I mean, they see you from the inside too, because you have a working relationship with them. They understand how your internal mechanisms work, but they still are outside the four walls of your business. They see how the public truly reacts to you. They see what you look like to the larger world in a way that you can't. I've always said that, your brand is not a mirror. Okay. The way you perceive internally your brand to be likely isn't exactly how it exists in the real world. So that's another value, I think, to being external and not internalizing too many of these functions, is because it gives you an objective outside view of how the world sees your brand, because that's what matters. It matters far more what the world thinks of your brand than it does of what you inside the brand think about your brand, because your perception is often wrong.
I think that objective outside perspective too, from when you get in large organizations or certain industries, the internal politics, if you want to call them that, kind of prevent certain decisions from being made. And sometimes it takes that outside force to put some inertia behind making the right decision. Or, there's just gridlock or just an uncertainty. Maybe somebody's in a seat that they're not really sure which direction is the best. Well, you're tapping into outside experts and specialists who can confidently say, well, path A is the best, and this is why, and here's how we can support you in that. So you unlock some gridlock within the organization and speed them up, which, the faster you can go and make good decisions quickly, I mean, that is business, that is being competitive. So I think it helps to have that strategic outside perspective that's not biased, doesn't care about the people's emotions in the other department, as much as we can. Not that we don't care, but you get the point. It's that we're more objective as much as a human can be, and pushing you in the direction that we feel is going to best align with whatever the vision is or whatever the goal is to get done. We're in it for the long haul. Some agencies aren't. I don't know how we necessarily prove that other than through doing good work and letting people talk for us. But I'm a big fan of the idea that there are just some people who are better at things. I think, people are like, well, why should I work with you or whatever? It's like, well, why should you pick Michael Jordan or LeBron James to be on your basketball team? Not saying we're the Michael Jordan of branding, but like, there are people who are just better. You don't have to argue about it. There are people who are just better than the guy sitting on the bench. No offense to the guy sitting on the bench.
Have you been watching Space Jam?
I have not watched the second one. I don't think I will.
Because right there, as soon as you said LeBron James and Michael Jordan, I was like, have you been watching the new Space Jam? And
I'm sad I left Kobe out of it. No, I haven't. And again, I know it's getting a lot of criticism too. And I thought it was an interesting point. I saw it in a meme or something. It was like, this movie was made for children. It's not made for the 40-year-olds who watched the first Space Jam. It's not. Right. It's not a nostalgic play. It's supposed to be goofy and silly and make no sense.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's the part of our podcast. When we get into the nerd stuff, you can kind of hear it. We don't get into it as heavy as we used to because of the interest and feedback and guests. But oh boy, yeah, that would be an episode right there about nostalgic marketing. We dive back into that one again and go like, remember when we said
like nostalgic broadcast on nostalgic broadcasting.
Yeah, I know. So anyways, we got anything we want to plug, John? I can't remember. You told me something, and I don't know, man. I'm sorry.
I'm sure we got everything we just talked about is stuff that we can help you with, whether it's, starting at the beginning with logo and brand identity to getting a website and making sure all the things that are necessary to support a web design are in place, up to, running ads, radio ads, media. I know everybody's out kind of busting their butts at networking events and trying to get out there conferences or kicking back up trade shows. We're getting some interest from some of our clients. We can support that. Sales collateral, signage, pop-ups, anything and everything. I mean, I had to plug. I plug us.
Cool. Yeah. So there you go, folks. You can visit us at nerdbrandagency.com. And if you want to know NerdBrand is spelled with a capital N and a capital B as one word because it comes from my background in WordPress. WordPress is a capital W and a capital P, and it's one word. And it's a part of their branding, and it's a part of ours as well. So if you're kind of wondering, is that supposed to be one word? Yeah, that's actually supposed to be one word, and that's where it comes from. That's the background on that and why it's done that way. Fun little tidbit to finish up for everybody as we close out the show. But yeah, you can visit us at nerdbrandagency.com. You can find us on everywhere on social media at Nerdbrand Agency, except YouTube. Go to YouTube. Just find us on YouTube. You just do a search for Nerdbrand, you'll find us. And like and subscribe. Hit the bells if you want to get updates on the next podcast. So make sure you do that. That'll help us also get our vanity URL because YouTube's got some pretty strict restrictions on what qualifies and what won't for that. So we are building that up. It's very it's one of probably the toughest channels I think anybody can endeavor to go on is YouTube. So anyways, do all that, keep listening, and keep your nerd brand strong.